If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Greg Gibas. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And Greg, we know each other already, which is good.
Yes, we do. We've met each other maybe 6 years ago online, 3 years ago in person, and now we're back online, I guess.
Yep. All the pleasure of COVID. So,
absolutely.
Greg, even though I know you, there is one or two human beings on planet Earth that have still not heard about you. Would you mind doing a brief introduction to them about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Greg, and I'm born in Poland originally. My family migrated to the US, so I grew up American most of my life. Got my management and master's degree in marketing in Australia, and then I have a business in the Philippines. And so I'm kind of been all over the place. Like to travel a bit, explore places. Right now, my business I've had for 10 years in the kind of outsourcing BPO kind of area, staffing area. And so for the last 10 years, I guess you can say I've been living the dream.
Excellent. Well, that's where most people want to be. So, Greg, we talked a little bit about sort of remote work and so on before we got onto this. I mean, it is a big topic. Everyone talks about it. And, you have obviously been living this for quite a while. But in general, how do you see remote work going, and what do you see happening here both during and after COVID?
Yeah, so before COVID, one of the biggest challenges I had selling kind of remote work services. Now, I'm not a big company. Like, I don't have business partners, just me running the show. So my target has also been small to mid-sized businesses. And, the big companies like, AT&T, Verizon, some big brands, they've been outsourcing and setting up call centers with thousands of employees and so on. Like, I was never big enough to get those kinds of deals. But the problem with small to mid-sized businesses is that a lot of them are like, oh, no, I really want my person to be in the office. We want to keep an eye on them. We want them to get coffee at lunch, something like that. So a lot of them were not really even set up to do remote work. A lot of people still had paperwork, or even if it's computerized, it's, exchanging documents on thumb drives and so on. When I first started, this is, 10 years ago. Now, of course, the world has moved towards Google Docs and other remote sharing software, project management software, online meeting software that's ubiquitous now. So I think now, because of COVID, in some ways, the biggest objection, which is, we need somebody to be here because we're not set up for remote work. We want somebody in the office. Now companies are being told you cannot have anybody at the office and you have to do everything remotely. So I feel like in some ways, COVID is going to be a boon to the industry, especially when it comes to small to mid-sized businesses, because now even smaller businesses are being told you have to go remote, you have to, keep that social distance, go online, and so on. So I think actually the industry is just getting started. I think it's going to be a huge thing in the future. And if there's one bright spot that comes out of COVID, despite the tragedy it's been for the world, but for this industry, I think it's going to be in retrospect, we're going to look back on it in 5 or 10 years and say that was the time that remote work broke out and became mainstream.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what I find really interesting here is I think a lot of the small business owners are really opening up their eyes as well to the possibilities, right? I mean, you and me both operate quite a bit in the Philippines, but there's amazing human beings all around the world, and I really see this being the opportunity for people worldwide. Like this could even be expats that previously really struggled to find work. Like I've like yourself, I've traveled a lot. I've met a ton of expats, and occasionally they really struggle. Like they maybe had a partner somewhere, or they tried to get work remotely and it was really difficult. But now with COVID, I think that is also going to change things significantly for people in those kind of situations, right? Because I think it's not just an outsourcing per se, but alone the fact that people actually open up their eyes and see the whole world around them, right? Because a lot of us people that have worked in sort of the online business industry, I mean, we've seen it for a long time, right? And I mean, we've been hiring people all over the globe for many, many years. But I think that is really gonna open up so much more now. And I really see, like we always say, the world is a small place, right? But I think actually COVID is gonna make it significantly smaller. And we're really going to see people start to take advantage, like even places like Eastern Europe, where they have, like, for example, a ton of high level developers. They might be 1 or 2 steps behind the US, but they're also a tenth of the price, right? So, yeah, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well for cities, because a lot of times people who did want to do remote work as expats, sometimes you have an international company set up in Manila or Bangkok or some big city where they have a big office building, hundreds of employees, and they'll hire some expats to be trainers, supervisors, and things like that. But now with the remote stuff, it's possible to travel and stay in smaller places, or as long as they have internet access, they're good. And even within the countries, like if you're within a big country in Europe somewhere, or let's say in the US, you don't have to be in New York or LA anymore to work in some industries. You can move back to, whatever your home state was, or pick a cheaper place to live and still earn that same wage. So if you're a New Yorker, for example, and your office has gone remote and you're making a New York wage, you can go live in Kansas for, a fraction of the cost, but keep making that New York wage. So it really does open up a lot of those opportunities. And the other thing that it does for companies is that it frees you for looking for talent anywhere else. Because if you're only limited to your geographical area, you got an office in, Austin, Texas, which is a good, rich labor market. But if you just can't find a particular talent, or that talent is too expensive there, you can now hire somebody somewhere else. And it's easy to do if your company is now set up for remote work, because that was the big problem before. It's like, oh, we don't have that set up. So if we hire somebody abroad, how are we going to keep them, or anywhere else, even within the country, just not in the office? How do you keep an eye on them? How do you give them assignments? I've gotten these questions from clients all the time before. Well, how do we give them assignments? Can we call them? It's like, yeah, of course you can call them. It's like, but people really don't know, because it was a new thing. So I think for workers also, it's going to be a boon. Like, you can apply for work anywhere now. Like if you're living in one area and you have a bad labor market there, you can apply for work in any state and not even have to move there.
Yeah.
So really, opportunities abound. That's why I think the next couple of years is going to be the Wild West as things get figured out. Although I do hear that some companies are asking employees to come back to the office now that, in some places where COVID has died down a bit, or, they're not having a spike. And some companies are telling employees, do you want to go back to the office, or we're planning on returning to the office? And I'm not sure how employees are going to feel about that. My staff personally, we went home base in March when the Philippine government advised all companies that can do remote work to convert to remote work. And I've asked the staff, well, do you guys want to return to the office when this is over? And everybody was like, no way. Some employees have gone back to their home provinces. They're enjoying time with their family, which previously they could only visit on weekends or something. And they're like, no, sir, we want to stay where we are. This is great. So I think employees are also being converted to this kind of lifestyle. Whereas previously, a lot of employees were actually reluctant. When I asked my staff before if they want to go home base years ago, they were like, no, sir, we want the office. We want to have the equipment, this, that. Like, we want to go away from the house. And now it's a complete 180.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what I really see, I mean, places exactly as you said, like probably New York and particularly like California, I think are going to be losing out big time with this stuff, right? I mean, we've already seen a lot of people move, but I think this is only going to accelerate things with them, right? Because suddenly they don't have the same pool from people having to live in a physical location to, be part of the the main mud, right? So I think that's definitely gonna hurt some of those states, particularly in the US, right? But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with small businesses, I know a large chunk of your audience is small businesses. They're thinking, well, how does this work for me? I think the question you have to ask yourself now is, if you're hiring and you're used to hiring local, you just have to ask yourself now, well, if they just need a computer and internet to work, why do I have to stay local? Like, why should I pay $4,000 a month salary for, some sort of operations manager who's going to work at home on the internet, when I can get the same position filled for half the price somewhere else in the world, be it Europe, be it Asia, or wherever else? So you can think strategically. And now with money being tight, and a lot of companies right now, from my experience at least, are not spending on anything except essentials. Like, if you're providing an essential service, of course you're going to get those contracts. But if you're providing something optional, like some new experimental marketing thing or whatever, nobody wants to talk to you right now. At least that's been my experience, from what I'm hearing from people. But with money being tight, I think the incentive is there. It's like you can now hire remotely, save money, and that's a huge thing just for the cost savings. And at the same time, maybe you even get better talent because the work ethics are different place to place. In a lot of places, especially if somebody knows that they're in demand, they will kind of act like the superstar, like, oh, you need to pay me this, do this for me, because, who else are you going to hire to fill that spot? But now that you free yourself up from that as an employer, you can say, okay, maybe I don't need to deal with that attitude. Maybe I could just hire somebody who's got equivalent skill or maybe better skill, but has a much better attitude in a place where people appreciate the job. Because I think as an employer and boss, for me, I've had hundreds of employees over my 10-year period come and go. And I think that attitude just matters so much. It's like a toxic attitude in the office or even on a group chat, if it's remote, could really be destructive to the psyche of the company. It could cause your good employees to resign also. I've had that situation before where good employees resign because, later in their exit interviews or much after the fact, if I kept in touch with them, they'll tell me, oh, I really didn't like the way this was happening in the office or that was going on. And it was like, wow, really? I didn't know that was a problem. I wish I knew before. So that's the problem. But now you have a bigger labor pool, so you can be more picky as an employer to pick for attitudes and work ethics.
Just one last thing for me before we finish this off, because particularly in the US, I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, but I want to hire American and I want to help US companies and so on. And I totally get the mindset. And the one thing I would say is my experience is actually that it often does help Americans, even when you outsource abroad. And I'll explain why, right? Because what happens is for most businesses, some things they have to get done are very, very basic, right? And it can literally be done by anyone. Now, if you're, in a state where minimum wage is $15 an hour, there's a lot of stuff that it doesn't make financial sense to actually do. So some of the examples would be things like lead generation, where there might be certain types of lead generation. For example, a lot of stuff happens on LinkedIn, where it's not worth it paying $15 an hour because you'll actually make less money than you bring in. However, these are some of the things that if you actually go and outsource them, the cost is significantly less, which means you can actually afford to do it and still make a little bit of money from it. And here's the kicker. What that does is that actually enables you to hire more people within the US as well, when you actually get some of those smaller things dealt with at a cost-effective rate. So basically what I see is the companies that outsource, it doesn't necessarily mean they hire less people overall in the US. They often end up hiring more because they actually have the financial capacity to do so. But the way I look at the business is you always need to look at tasks happening and trying and understand, does it, like if you're sitting copying, pasting data, right? Like some of the clients we work with is, for example, in e-commerce, where, they're sitting getting one order and then they're placing that exact order in a different system. Now, the thing is, if they have to pay someone $15 an hour, that's never going to work for them, right? They're not going to actually have a business doing that. But the fact that they actually have some people at a lower cost doing that actually enables them to grow and scale their business, and therefore actually end up hiring more people within the US, right? So
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
totally not always the case. And there's definitely, I totally get that there's exceptions, right? But definitely what I've seen is that there's quite a bit of benefit also to US companies to utilize the outsourcing environment, right?
Absolutely. I think it almost never backfires because there's layers to this. Even if you personally hire less people in the US, but you can provide a cheaper service now to your clients are saving money, which allows them to hire more people. So even if you're not the one directly creating more jobs, you're indirectly creating more jobs in the US. Like resources, if you study economics, should always be allocated the most efficient way possible.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that people take for granted is the wage gap, which I think actually maybe, I don't know how much this is being covered out there, but I think the wage gaps around the world are going to close up if remote work becomes the new normal. Because once people in third world countries, for example, where the wages are, let's say $500 a month, $1,000 a month for a position that in the US would cost 5,000, once they figure out they're also in demand now, they're competing at that level, they're going to start demanding higher wages also. So I think, and then as a byproduct of that, people in the West who are not providing a super valuable service might have to lower their salary expectations to be able to compete for those kind of jobs. So I think, wages are going to get flattened around. Now, of course, the nationalistic view is that, oh, you should help your country first. But I mean, in my opinion, everybody has a right to compete, and like somebody just because they're from another country doesn't mean they should be doomed to poverty or not have opportunities, especially if they can help do a better job and kind of like raise the wealth of the world, if you will. So I think, I think, yeah, there's different ways of looking at it, what your priority is. I mean, if you want to just hire American or just hire British or just hire French or whatever, that's fine. You have a right to that, and you will have to charge your clients accordingly because of their costs. So you might not be able to compete on price. But if that's your niche, that's your niche. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't disagree that everybody has the right to try it and then just see how the marketplace reacts. But I think there's nothing inherently wrong about giving the market other options. Like I used to work in retail sales when I was in college. I was working at a store selling computers, things like that. And I've never had anybody come up and ask like, oh, where was this thing made? Because I only want to buy American or, whatever, or I want to avoid some country or something like that. I think maybe it happened like once or twice in the 5 years I worked retail, maybe, a handful of times like that. But for the most part, consumers also want the best prices, because if you save money at home, then you're gonna also have more money to spend on other necessities and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of argument, which I have received from prospective clients before, where they're like, oh, I really want to hire American or something, when I was selling in the US. So I think, that does come up, but I think it's a short-sighted way of looking at it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, my mindset in business have always been, I want to create the biggest businesses I can, and I want to hire more people, right? Because I fundamentally believe, like even now, when we look at the world, right, I think fundamentally the biggest challenge the world is seeing is lack of employment. And I believe that if you can help add employment, you're doing good things in the world, because the more people being employed, the less issues there will be. And I think even now, looking in the US, obviously, there's bigger things at play, no doubt. But in the end of the day, the more unemployed people, the more problems you will have. And I think that's universal for all countries all around the world, right? So for me, employment generation is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's done in a sustainable way, though, because every employee should contribute value to the company, because a lot of people do. I have met people who believe that some kind of makeshift jobs are good, like, oh, you should just hire more people just to do this, like unimportant work, just so you can provide jobs. And in my view, a job that's not productive it's pretty much the same as charity or a donation. It's not really helping the issue. And also creating or keeping jobs artificially in place for people who aren't qualified prevents them from learning new skills. I think the biggest driver for people to get out there and advance their own careers, advance their skill levels, and work hard is knowing they have to do it to compete. Because if you tell people, okay, no matter where you are, you don't have to learn anything new, don't open a book, and we'll provide a job for you, then you're keeping the world down. But if they know they have to learn more and do better and be more productive to keep their jobs, then they'll have that incentive to keep learning, advancing. And as they become more productive, the whole world becomes more productive. And then, people achieve great things. We've landed on the moon already. We're going to land on Mars at some point, with people and all those kinds of things. Those kinds of advancements aren't possible if all the technologies that underlie it would not be advancing. Like if we were still crying over telephone operators who had to physically connect lines together, we should save those jobs, we shouldn't automate that or outsource that, where would the world be, where if we went that route. So I think progress is always good, but we do have to understand also as employers that progress can be painful. So I think the callous attitude of like, oh, well, it's like economic Darwinism. Well, sorry, you're out of work and you have no food. That's also not a good way to go. I think there should be a balanced approach where either government or businesses through organizations, charities, or educational institutions provide people a path forward. So people who are really being displaced by the advancements, by outsourcing, for example, even, they should be told like what other options they have. People shouldn't just leave them in the dust and say, well, we don't care about you, bye. We should tell them, hey, look, this job is going away. Here's the trend, but here is something you can learn that you can contribute to. And then, you can even make more money than you used to make in this old job that's now going away. So I think people should be given a hand up in that case.
And one of the key things that I see particularly around that, Greg, is the fact that, people are like, oh yeah, but I'll never learn to be a developer. And while that's probably true for a lot of people, like there's still a ton of work. There's still a ton of jobs and work getting completed where you don't need to be a technical genius, right? Like it's not all about tech, and there is lots and lots of jobs still available. If you're a truck driver and suddenly they automate truck driving, right? Like there's still jobs that can be done. They might need a little bit of tech skills or ability to use a computer, etc. But you don't need to be a computer wizard in every job on the planet, right? And I think that's one of the arguments that I see once in a while that kind of puts it to the extreme is basically people saying, "Oh, I'll never learn to be a developer." And I think that's a difficult mindset, right? Because you don't need to be a developer, right? Like you don't need to be a tech genius to get at work. And yeah, there's definitely some areas where that's helpful and well paid, but there's also plenty of jobs and there's plenty of opportunities where a very different skill set can add a lot of value still, right?
I agree, but there's also the attitude problem. For example, I've met some people who are particularly older, and they'll be proud of the fact they never used email or that they don't, I never knew how to use the phone. And they kind of like brag about it like it's a point of pride that they're technologically illiterate. And I think as a society, we need to kind of change that so that, people keep in touch with the latest developments. I'm not saying like people should be taking computer courses or something, but oftentimes, for example, like, even some friends or family members will call me and say, oh, I got this error message. What do I do? Well, what's the error message say? Oh, it says insufficient memory, delete some files. Okay, what should I do? Well, it says delete some files. Just go delete some files, right? It's like an example like that. It's, a lot of people are feeling like, oh, something came up. I should just go to somebody who knows about computers to do it. Like, just read the prompts, figure it out. If you can know how to use a computer, a phone, and all those kinds of things, at least to a decent level. Not saying gotta be a wizard at it, just, have the attitude of like, what, I will click something and see what happens. It's like very rarely will you completely disable a device by just, doing something in software. Usually if you screw up something in software, most of the time, there's probably a few exceptions out there, but 99% of the time, you can easily change things back or reset them or whatever the case is. So don't be afraid to play around with it.
Yeah.
And also, I would say employers, if you're an employer who relies on staff to do everything technical, I think it wouldn't hurt to learn how to, edit a graphic in Photoshop. Now, yeah, sure, you don't have to do a whole, bunch of filters and that kind of stuff. But if all you need to do is write some text over a background and export it as a JPEG for your profile photo or something, you shouldn't need to rely on a graphic designer for a 45-second task like that. And also knowing the basics allows you to kind of know what's possible. And if you're ever hiring somebody for those skill sets, you can kind of like have an idea if you're being ripped off or not too. Because if you have zero clue about anything technical and, and that's a point of pride for you, then, who knows what your employees are doing, like maybe they're ripping you off. Maybe they're taking 10 times longer on tests, particularly if they're going remote, which is the topic here. Like if you tell somebody who's working remote, make me this WordPress site for my new service, or I'm opening a new salon or whatever. How do you know if it takes them 3 weeks to do it? How do you know that they actually did it for 3 weeks? Because that could be done in a day, but they could tell you, oh, it's going to take you 3 weeks. Now you're paying them 3 weeks salary for 1 day's work because you don't know better. You don't know anything.
Yeah. No, valid point. Totally.
Yeah, and I think educationally, out there, of course, college, universities are super expensive, things like that. But, if you don't need the diploma, you just want to learn the skill, just YouTube it, Google it. I think if you go on YouTube, if you enter on YouTube, anything from learning formulas of theoretical physics to fixing some super obscure problem in Ajax code or whatever technical stuff, you will find a YouTube video, like almost guaranteed that you'll find a YouTube video that explains step by step how to do it for free. You just watch it on YouTube. So I think, people need to look it up more. I used to work in computer repair for a bit also, and it was super common for all of us, customer drops off the computer, tells us the problem. We take the computer in the back and we're just Googling it. We're typing in the error message verbatim into Google and following instructions somebody posted on some obscure forum, and it's like, boom, we fixed it. It's like, we're computer technicians, we have our certifications, whatever, but for a lot of things, like we end up just Googling it too. Like, so it's like, learn how to Google, people.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting, right? Because I remember even the first time I started working corporate and I had to learn how to tie a tie. Like I had no clue, but I YouTubed it and it worked, right? So it's not just, it's definitely not just about technical things, right? But I think particularly for the more experienced generation, I think this is definitely one of the things to learn, right? Like, because a lot of the mindset over the years have been very much, you go to get an education, then you know what to do, and then you can do your job. But nowadays, education is fluent. It's constant. If you go and take a 5-year education today, when you come out, everything has changed, right? So it's not that you learn something that you can then use for the rest of your life. It's you learn something so you understand the concept, and then you need to keep educating yourself and keeping yourself up to date with the latest developments, right? And that's even sort of some old-fashioned professions like accounting, right? Like if you learn accounting today in school, 5-10 years from now, when you're actually out there using it, like the systems will be totally different, the rules will be totally different. Like so much have changed that, as an industry professional, your goal is to stay up to speed with it, right? And that's what it takes.
Yeah, and I think it's true for both sides. I think for the employee, it's important to stay in touch because sometimes, employees will get a job where a company uses one particular CRM, for example, and they'll never upgrade because, companies, we don't like to upgrade often because we don't like creating extra friction. So maybe I stick with the same CRM for 5 years, even though there's so many new things out there. But when you lose that job and you're looking for another one, same job title, same job, a different CRM, just a different software, now you're lost, And I think it's good to always have that education where even if you're doing well in your work, spend an hour a week Googling around for stuff in your industry, just kind of see what's out there, just so you at least kind of like have it in your mind. And as an employer also, you should be looking up kind of how things work so that you're a little bit educated about when you hire people, when you're managing people, and plus just to get new ideas, because sometimes you have a routine that's making you money now, but when the industry changes, and it could change fast, as we saw now in COVID, so many companies that were doing so well now upside down. It's good to have options. So if you, for example, do prefer to have local workers, and you're fortunate enough to be in an area where COVID hasn't hit too hard and you're able to meet with your staff, why not set things up for remote work, so that if ever it gets worse in the next few months or something, maybe you have an option where, okay, now we can easily not lose productivity. We'll just all go home and we already have the system set up. Don't, just kind of prepare for those possibilities, or at least, watch a couple YouTube videos on how to set up Google Docs and things like that, Zoom meetings, so you know how those things work. You don't have to even know how to do it yet, but now at least you know what's possible and roughly what's involved. And if ever you have the need, you're like, oh, here's a problem, I know what can solve this. Google Docs, they have an app for that. I saw it on a YouTube video once or something.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of constant education is super important. And I feel it should be scheduled. People schedule workouts, like, oh, I'm going to run 3 times a week. I'll do lifting twice a week and so on. They put that in their calendar. They go to the gym on time. Why not schedule 1 hour of, I'm going to Google stuff about my profession time, every Thursday afternoon or something. I will spend 1 hour on Google, look at some developments, read a couple articles or blogs about, whatever area I'm working in. I think that's already enough. Like, it's like a mental workout, because when the time comes to use that knowledge, if you haven't even started learning about it, it's too late.
Yeah.
It's like you have to absorb it over time, because, you read something, you have to let it kind of absorb into you. You read something more, and over time you build up the knowledge. Like, people always say, personal trainers will say, oh, if you work out twice a week for 1 year, after 1 year passes, you're going to see amazing results, in many cases, right? Because it's like that workout builds up. Same thing with this. If you read for 1 hour a week for 1 year, you'll be a completely different person in 1 year.
Yeah, totally. And I think, particularly back to your point, right? Like, I think what we saw with COVID was there was companies who were just like, oh, I don't know what to do, I can't do anything, etc. And then you saw companies that were super creative in how they could continue providing service. You saw some restaurants, for example, that had never done delivery, that literally within a couple of days of lockdown, they literally turned their whole business into a fully remote delivery business, right? And people still needed food. People are still ordering food, and they could deliver, right? And then you saw other people in similar circumstances just sitting on their hands and saying, oh, the world is going under. So I think that mindset of that you just talked to, and looking at opportunities and, what are the options, what are the possibilities, is definitely a great mindset to combat situations like that, right?
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to how you think of your business, because I think a lot of people will think of their business as a particular mission. Like, oh, our goal is to provide the best restaurant experience for, older couples or something, like something very specific. And they don't think like, so when something happens, they don't think like, oh, we should just do a different mission. Let's just be a best delivery service or something like that. They're like, oh, there's no way we can complete our mission. We give up, So for example, like in my case, I lost some call center clients because of the whole situation, because all of a sudden we can't call on businesses that are closed anymore. So it's like we lose that, but instead of saying like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna, put up my hands and I'm screwed. It's like, okay, well, if people aren't picking up the phones right now because of lockdown, maybe I could put that staff to work on something else. Maybe we could do some sort of other online stuff, some WordPress stuff, some, whatever other tasks, maybe we could look for something there in the meantime. So instead of like thinking of myself, oh, I am a call center, it's like, no, we could just, our mission, and I always tell my staff this, our mission is to do what the clients need. That's all. So whatever they need, if we can reasonably do it or train on it, we'll do it. Or, we'll get the right people in place to take care of it. It's not to, fulfill a specific task only, because tasks change all the time. So if your company's mission is married to a very specific procedure or task, you're really setting up yourself for failure in the future. You have a time limit until you stop making money. And the problem with it is, and I've been in the situation before, you never know when that shot clock expires. You know, like you never see it coming. You know, it's like you're making money one day and then, you know, you lose something, you know, you lose a client, you lose some sort of situation happens or whatever. And then all of a sudden some new competitor pops up, you know, like Blockbuster didn't see Netflix coming, even though in hindsight, it's plain as day. It's like, of course, DVD delivery and then online stuff is going to dominate. Like in hindsight, we're like, they didn't see it coming. But Blockbuster, I heard, passed up on buying Netflix when they could have for a cheap price because they were like, what are you talking about? We want to be a video store. We want people to have that experience of looking at DVD covers, you know, like it's like they're not thinking about what's possible in the future. Like, you know, you should. So, and they never probably realized that they had a expiration date on that business. And every business has an expiration date, even ones that seem inevitable. People say Google and Facebook are, you know, such a mainstay, they're never going away. But I heard the same thing about MySpace before and Hotbot, Yahoo search, right? It's like, those were also like back in the day, it was like, what? Facebook's never going to take off. We all have MySpace. What are you talking about? You know, and it's like now Facebook is, you know, maybe, I mean, they're still doing very well, but there's a lot of competition out there and all that. They're not going to be around forever. Even smartphones, you know, there's going to be a time someday in the future, maybe not anytime super soon, that smartphones aren't a thing anymore. We'll have some other communicator device or, you know, whatever technology.
Suddenly the smartphones aren't very smart anymore.
Exactly. So I think relying on any particular process technology, which is a big warning to all of you app companies out there, you know, or companies that rely on Facebook or Instagram or something for all of their marketing or, you know, their entire platform, because you don't own that platform and it could go away anytime, not just because that network goes down, but or eventually ends, but, you know, Instagram can easily ban you or something for whatever reason, and all of a sudden your business goes away. It's a dangerous place to be. I think there's nothing wrong with using those platforms to make a living. That's what they're there for anyway, but have a backup plan. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it multiple times as well with our businesses, right? I mean, at one point we were doing a tons of medical transcriptions, and suddenly the hospitals got these tools that did it automatically, right? And we were like, well, this is probably going to last us for many, many years and be a very profitable business. And you know, suddenly somewhere else were able to do it automatically. So our services from one day to the next were literally no longer needed. And
I think that just all underscores that what we're saying is that, you know, you have to research the developments in your industry so you can see these trends coming. Because if you're just focused on your business, you shut out the news, you shut out everything else, you're just doing your one thing, you won't even see it coming. By the time you do, it's too late. So yeah, continuing education for everybody, employees, employers. You know, the world we live in is increasingly more competitive. So, you know, back in the day, you hear stories like, oh, I was the first person to start an Italian restaurant in the city, so by default, I win, you know?
Yeah.
It's like those days are gone of being the first and only kid on the block with some sort of business. And if you do come up with such an idea, because of the way technology and information moves and people can easily copy it these days, you know, you're not going to last long as the only kid on the block. You know, Bitcoin came along, and how many coins do we have now? Like, it's, you know, it's just, yeah, there's always going to be competition. There's always also going to be somebody smarter, more funded, and better organized than you out there. So you have to kind of do your best to stay afloat these days. Like, resting is just not an option. Maybe when you retire and you have your piles of money and investments, annuities, whatever, maybe then you can have a rest. But even then, you still have to keep an eye on those markets because they change fast too. So
excellent, Greg. I think this has been a super interesting podcast and a super interesting discussion. I definitely hope the audience have listened and takes away a lot of value from it. So thank you very much for joining me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Matt, for having me, and we'll catch up soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.